This is On the Line, and I'm Eric Felton. A leading theorist of violent jihad has renounced terrorism. Syed Imam al-Sharif, better known as Dr. Fadl, was a founding member of the Egyptian terrorist group al-Jihad, along with Ayman al-Zawahiri. Zawahiri would go on to found al-Qaida by merging al-Jihad with Osama bin Laden's group. One of the key ideological texts used by al-Qaida was a book written by Fadl in 1988, Foundations of Preparation for Holy War, which claimed that jihad and fighting with non-believers is the natural state of Islam. And in 1994, al-Qaida published a massive and even more ruthless text by Fadl, the Compendium of Pursuit of Divine Knowledge. That book declares that the blood of infidels is legal and defines as infidels not only non-Muslims, but any Muslims who disagree with al-Qaeda's radical vision of Islam. Jailed in Yemen after the September 11th terrorist attacks, Dr. Fadl was extradited to Egypt, where he remains in prison. From jail, he has published a book of revisions, recanting his earlier views. In an interview with the Arabic daily newspaper Al-Hayat, Fadl now says Islam does not allow Muslims, quote, to kill civilians, foreigners, and tourists, or destroy property and commit aggression against the lives and property of those who are inviolable under the pretext of jihad. All of this is forbidden, Fadl said. What is behind Dr. Fadl's change of heart, and what does it mean for the future of al-Qaeda? I'll ask my guests. Joining us from New York, Bret Stephens, a columnist for the Wall Street Journal newspaper. And joining us from Miami, Florida, Walid Pherez, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and author of the book, The Confrontation, Winning the War Against Future Jihad. Welcome and thanks for joining us. Bret Stephens, tell us a little bit more about Dr. Fadl. Who is Dr. Fadl?
Well, I think your introduction laid it out nicely. He is one of the central theoreticians of modern-day violent Salafist ideology, like Ayman al-Zawahiri. He was an Egyptian surgeon who, in the 1970s, gravitated toward the radical Islamist circles, which were responsible for the murder of Anwar Sadat. He was active in Pakistan and Afghanistan during the war there against the Soviets, and he wrote these two central books that justify the kind of nihilistic terrorism that al-Qaeda champions. He was taken into prison a few years ago, eventually transferred to Egypt, and there's some question about whether his new book, The Revisions, is, if you will, the product of electroshock therapy, courtesy of the Egyptian state, or if it reflects a genuine change of heart. But there's no doubt that the revisions have had a major effect in that sort of ideological corner of the world. One of the most interesting products of it is that it forced Ayman Zawahiri to respond with a 215-page manifesto of his own. I'd like to think that if Ayman al-Zawahiri is busy writing 215-page manifestos, then he has plenty of time on his hands, which is probably a good sign for the rest of us.
Walid Pherez, how important a figure is Dr. Fadl in the terrorist movement?
Well, Sayyid Imam, or Dr. Fadl, lived under the days where al-Qaeda's ideological view was on the rise, and that explains, by the way, why Ayman al-Zawahiri will spend so many hours and days and months and pages to respond to him. Let's imagine another Islamist or jihadi person who was not a member of al-Qaeda or has not been influencing al-Qaeda issuing those manifestos, and there are plenty actually in the region of people who are supported by the local governments or regimes, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, who are publishing things very close to what Dr. Fadl is saying. But the importance of what he said was, as you just mentioned in the intro and our colleague Bret mentioned, he is one of the, who had accomplished the benchmark writing on what I call direct jihadism, in contrast with long-term jihadism. The previous person who was that important would have been Sayyid Qutb, in the past century. Now, his importance today is for those who are fighting al-Qaeda, primarily the Arab governments, the Arab moderate governments, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and others, because they will use his production to broadcast throughout the region and not just convince those who are already jihadists that the interpretation by bin Laden faction is wrong, but to also make sure that the next ones, the jihadists who are brewing in madrasas, will not follow the same path. But let me say one more thing here. The real struggle is between two schools. It has been the case after the collapse of the Soviet Union and continue to be the case after 9/11. The long-term jihadists, those who want to spread the ideology, ultimately would like to reach the goals, stated goals of the al-Qaeda type jihadist Salafists, such as re-establishing the caliphate, establishing emirates, a level of Islamization, Sharia. That body is not necessarily a direct action violent jihadist. They have governments where these policies are being implemented, such as including Saudi Arabia or Sudan and in other places. The short-term jihadists, the ones I call them hot-headed in my book, wants to implement jihad now in a very direct way, including the most violent way, because they believe that if they begin that action, Allah would do the rest. So they have a sort of a messianic approach to it. Now, those intellectuals and ideologues, and not just al-Fadl, I have a list of names from people from Saudi Arabia and Jordan, the actual inspirer of Zarqawi in Jordan also changed his mind. They are in between two sections, two factions. The al-Qaeda that wants to do jihad right now and against civilians and against governments who are not declared war on by the Muslim governments, and the actual Muslim governments who do not want to see this. And I think al-Fadl, well, of course, I agree with Brett, he published from prison, so we have to wait and see when he's out of prison, or if others who believe as he does would change without going to prison. That would be the ultimate test.